Welcome back to another episode on Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky's Sefarim. We've taken a break, but we're back, and this promises to be a fascinating episode on the Orchos Yosher, arguably the most popular sefer or the most learned sefer that Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky ever published. I'm sure Rabbi Brodt will talk about this a little bit more, but this is a sefer which is easily accessible on so many levels to so many people. It's been published by ArtScroll in English, a wonderful job by them. And once again, this episode has been sponsored anonymously in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Yitzchak David Meis L'Shama Have an Aliyah. And it's Friday. It's right before Shabbos. It is the eve or post the Israeli attacks on Iran. And Rabbi Brodt is here. He's in his shelter with his farm. We're very grateful for Rabbi Brodt taking the time to record this. And it should be a schos and a shmira for all of Klal Yisrael, for all those on the front lines, those fighting, the ones who are in Eretz Yisrael and Klal Yisrael around the world. Rabbi Dr. Brodt.
Shalom. Okay, so we're going to talk about the sefer Orchos Yosher. So Orchos Yosher is printed approximately in 1997. Now, the reason I can't say for sure is because it's very hard to find the first edition of this work. And it was instant. I remember when it came out, it was a leap year, and it sold out instantly. I heard when I was in America at the time, learning in yeshiva, and I remember it sold out with either 24 hours, 48 hours. Now, this is before social media. This is before the internet, all these things. The sefer instantly, people grabbed it. It was printed again and again, many times with Tosafos. So let's say I can't tell you the exact date, is because mine is like, it says the 12th edition. So it was a leap year, and we already discussed, did Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky really write a sefer because it was the leap year or not? Is it that was the reason why he wrote the sefer that year? Bottom line is, became popular instantly and remained popular until today. There's many editions of the sefer. There's editions that have biurim and Hebrew fancy to be mafarish, all different things in the sefer. There's a fancy ArtScroll edition. I did not see it, but I heard talking to someone last week. He told me it's incredible. They did an excellent job putting together all different things relating to the sefer from other stuff, stories of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, his Rebbitzin, and everything like that. Now, I did not check and see what ArtScroll claims or what other people say about the sefer Orchos Yosher. This is my readings of the sefer, and so I fully take responsibility. I say it could be many other people have different ways of looking at this sefer. Now, what is this sefer? That's the first question. Is it a Musar sefer? Is it a Hashkafa sefer? So if you look right away, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, we've said this many times, he says a lot of times things about his sefer. For example, the Shar, which he wrote, he says, it's a collection from Chazal, midas tayvis, Torah, Tefilah, ve'emunah. To give chizuk in these areas, your Shemayim, midas tayvis, Torah, and Tefilah. Okay, there's something like 30 prakim. Now, he then has a Hagdama. In the Hagdama, he says, he brings down Arba Tzrichim Chizuk. 4 things need chizuk. What are they? Torah, Ma'asim Tovim, Tefilah, Derech Eretz. And Rashi says, he brings down Rashi, Tzrichim Chizuk sheis chazak ben tamir ubechol koichai. So that's the first thing that he sets out of Gemara. Then he says, Ukfar also kol gedoyle Yisrael sifrei musar lechazik ben es harabim. To be mechazik the rabbim. So already in the first episode of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, I claimed that he's influenced from many people, but 4 people in particular, and these 4 people were the Gra, the Chafetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, and his father. All 4 of these people wrote such chiburim. The Gra, one of his first chiburim actually published is the Gra Mishlei, definitely a work that has materials relating to Musar, Mechazik people, or to give Hadracha. The Chafetz Chaim wrote many Svarim in Yani Musar, which some will mention from Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky later on today. Chazon Ish, besides for the Igros that we were zeicha to publish, that we had after he was nifter, but we have also the Sefer Amunah B'Tachin. And then his father, he wrote a Sefer Kol Chayei Olam. So that's the first thing. Then he says, then Rabbi Chaim adds, not every dar is the same nisyonis. Now, there's a very important sentence, and a lot could be read into it, but I think that's a very valid reason why you need always different things. There's different nisyonis. Number 3, how does he know what the nisyonis are? Everyone knows. This is the thing everyone spoke about Chaim Kanievsky from day one. He was completely absorbed in learning. He never read a newspaper, never was anywhere. He didn't know anything going on. No. Fisha Reisi B'Darenu Rabim Baim V'Shoyelim Lefi Hasibus V'Nisyoni Sheish B'Darenu. He knew what was going on because he got hundreds of thousands of questions in all areas. The lines are out the door to him. So he picked up what the nisyonis are, what the problems are of this particular generation. And from that, we'll see some of the different things that he talks about, the amazing advice that he gives in this chibur. So he set out, then he says, of course, I'm not Roy. So, but he says, okay, well, why he could still anyway do it. Okay, so this is a short Hagdama, which gives us already some insight into the sefer. Now, to be clear, one of the first Svarim, which we already spoke about back in season 1, was his Chibur on Orchos Chaim, which is also a somewhat passable Musar sefer. And we discussed it was in certain yeshivas it's learned during Elul, and Chaim over there went all out, finishing it in his low 20s and already demonstrating there his crazy yeda and kol Torah kula. So there also some type of Musa sefer, but there it's different. He's just writing pirush. He's writing a pirush or biurim for the existing sefer. Here he's saying himself, he's picking a topic and then he goes through the topic. So it has 30 chapters. So the question was, why did he pick these 30 chapters? So he already answered it pretty much. He said, these are the things that go on. So they asked him, why don't you write more? So again, we've quoted many times, the Sefer Hasvarim says, what Hashem, Masha Hashem Sam Belibi, you can't just stam write. It was some type of thing that he felt Hashem told him to write, gave him the koyach, told him whatever. And we'll see, maybe this might relate to a chapter which he has over here about Ruach Hakodesh, and where he defines what Ruach Hakodesh is. A different time he said, they asked him again, probably asked him a million times about it, like everything else they asked him. They harassed him on everything. But he said, I need to have time to write my Chibur Derech Chachma, which was a sefer on chacham, which sadly we only got a small part of that. And I have to answer 80 letters a day at least. So kids, I'm busy. So this is what I wrote, and that's it. Lamaisa, it seems, according to some, he wrote a parak a day. But kids, it took very fast. When they told him it's such a great sefer, so he says, I don't know what, nothing in here is mine. It's all likutim from midrashim of Chazal. Okay, Lamaisa, when you go through the sefer, you could see they bring from other people. There's a certain chen in the sefer, and even though, but he played it down. Fine. Two other points. One is that the money for the profits of this sefer, he was managed that this should go for tzedakah, similar to where Kabbalah that he had from his father. His father was naive with the sefer Chai Olam. Also, all the monies went to tzedakah. Another thing is that the end of this sefer, chapter 30, is all about Tefilah. Tons of different things about Tefilah in general, and then he has about 46, I think, different anhagas, halachas that one has to be nizar in all areas of Hilchos Tefilah. So this was actually published earlier in a kuntris called Havul Hashem Kavod, which was published by his son-in-law. But there it didn't say the name. It was published a few years before Orchos Yosher, like 3-4 years before. And for some reason, he didn't want his name out then that it was him. But later on, it was put into here. And I guess he allowed them. He was the one who published it. So I guess it came out that he was the author of the earlier work, which is interesting because in general, Kanievsky, all the works, as far as we know, he wrote his name on. Now, one last story that they say, so as I said, I remember this also, is that basically the Sefer was a bestseller immediately. Here it said thousands of copies, in the Sefer Svarim it says thousands of copies were sold in a month, and again and again. Because he was, right at this time, he was hospitalized, he was very sick. So they say here that Rav Steinman said it was the Ayin Hara on the amazing Tfutza Atzuma of this Sefer. So they told this to the Chaim Kanievsky. So Chaim Kanievsky said, Chas v'sholom, how could that be? The Chazon Ish said in Bnei Brak, there's no Ayin Hara. So the Rebbetzin, she said, L'maisa, you're in the hospital, which is not in Bnei Brak. You need a refuah. So he was masking to have his brother-in-law, Rabbi Levine, son of Rabbi Levine, who was very legendary, famous to removing Ayin Haras, and they had an Ayin Hara removed from him, possibly because of the great success of this sefer. So these are some of the pitchufkas that they throw out in the Sefer Svarim, and from there, pretty much in many of the other Svarim, on Chaim Kanievsky, they take it, sometimes attributing, sometimes not, and one other thing is they bring a story. I'm not going to go into Barichos, but the story is to the effect that there was Adam Gadol Ad Ma'id in the time of the Shla, and it seems this person was Isaac Yom V'Layla in learning. He was a Magachir, everything. Unbelievable talmid chacham. And he goes up to Shemayim after Me'av Esrim, and Bekitzer, he saw that since he was not in the same darga as his fellow gadol of the city, the Shla, and the reason turns out was because the Shla wrote Musar in his sefer, and this person never wrote Musar in his sefer. So they say Reb Chaim saw the sefer, so he felt he also has to write a Musar sefer. Okay, this is what they bring down from that Reb Chaim maybe told them. Some type of Messiah about this is also quoted in different of the works on Chaim Kanievsky. Anyway, so bottom line is, what is there anything more to say about this sefer? So first of all, what is his sources? So I keep on saying, he says himself, the sources are Be'ikar from Chazal. So Kedarka B'Kodesh, we see here his crazy hekif in Kol Torah Kula. And when we talk about Chaim Kanievsky, Kol Torah Kula does not mean, just the Bavli. It means all Midrashim. It means Yerushalmi. It means Zoyar. It means Farikta Midrashim, the Eitz Midrashim, which we will get to in one of the episodes. The Chashivas of Chaim Kanievsky used this Chibur Eitz Midrashim a lot, even a Chibur called Pisrin Torah that was published from a university press, he quotes in this work. And then a lot of Rambam, throughout the works of the Rambam, in Yonim, he pulls out, Rabbeinu Yoini Shari Tshuva, Sefer Chasidim, and you'll find here and there pieces of the Sefer Abris, the Sefer he's also very fond of. Okay. But Lamaisa, in all the chapters, you could usually find that he's Maisif a few different things. So first, to mention briefly some Nakudas in the Sefer, one chapter is about, he talks about Bitul Torah. So he says it's a terrible Aveira. He brings you a bunch of Chazals from everywhere, Rishonim, all different Geshmak Amar Makaimis. And then he says he asked the famous question: why is it that why is the Yetzer Hara spend so much time? What's the great taiva of talking, schmoozing, dvarim b'telim, and everything like that? So he brings, based on a gra, that because the mitzvah is so great, so and there's murder kedusha, so a lot of times you find that the hepech, the kayach of tuma and ra is so great, and that's what makes it that there's such a taiva to speak Dvarim B'Telim. This is based on a Gra, and now then, which I said also, he's very. We mentioned numerous times of Ada. He's very fond of the Gra, but then he asks a famous question: he not asks. He tries to find a solution. How does one save himself from Bitul Torah? So he says basically, Hergel. It's a milchama, it's a battle, but you can't let the Yetzer Hara is always going to find exclusive tirutzim and reasons to be mavato from you, and you have to fight the Yetzer Hara. Then he says a fascinating words. He says, "Mikol makom ein hamilchama kasha kol kach." Once you fight it and you're aware of all this, then it's not such a big deal. I mean, to say he's taking an approach, which is a deal amongst different people, that some people say that the talmid chacham's Yetzer Hara is more powerful than anyone. His approach is that once you get used to it and you're able to overcome it, there is a milchama. He's not saying there's no milchama, but it's less that he's bringing this down. So this is an interesting chizuk if you go with this, at least this approach of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Then he says, but what's l'maisa bit dvarim b'telim is a chomer ad ma'id. What is the amount of dvarim b'telim? It's an isser, all these things. How much you're not allowed to shmooze ever? So he brings down, interestingly, from the Chazon Ish, that the gather dvarim b'telim is if you speak more than 10 minutes. Furthermore, he brings down interesting Hagdama from the Beis Aaron from Vulcan that had a Messiah that yes, you're allowed to speak a little. The point is not to speak a lot. And Adarabba, sometimes it's important to speak. If you're just going to learn the whole time, it could end up having an opposite effect. Okay, so it's interesting here. You have at least the psak, so you have a heter to battle 10 minutes. But the shaila is how often is it per hour? Obviously not. Is it in a day? Is it that he doesn't specify? It could be. I would imagine that maybe some people asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Many people might have asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And when we get the Das Noite, when they put out the volume on Orchos Rabbeinu, maybe over there they'll have exact hagdaras of the shailos that people asked of how long is Bitul Torah. This psak of the Chazon Ish, when is it said? Anyway, but the point is, these are some fascinating practical makudis in that he brings down. Then he has a chapter all about Dalekavschus. So, okay, everyone knows you start out with a Mishnah Novice, and he brings all different chazals. And it's fascinating. When you read this chapter, you could see that he was probably struggling. On one hand, he wanted to talk about Dalekavschus, but even when he was bringing down every tzitut, that he was bringing down a quote from a Gemara right away, he's like, there's a shultus that has a different gersa. And then he's reading the Agad to Gemara, and he has a problem with, maybe a problem of Rubis in this Gemara. There's another problem of Yichud. Like, he couldn't shut down his halachic mind at the same time while he's learning this text. He's bringing it for Musar purposes, to inspire, etc. Okay, another chapter, which is a chapter Zerizus. So there also he brings the importance of Zerizus, and from many different Makairos. And of course, here he ends off this chapter with the Chazon Ish and the Chafetz Chaim he says, Kol Gdol Yisrael that he knew of, there was reason ma'od. But whatever they had to do, they would do right away. Chazon Ish, Chafetz Chaim, and others. And then he brings down even a halachic discussion. If someone pushes off something, the sugya v'ainis b'yom achar, and he writes his very bekitzer. Bekitzer, his point is of this chapter is there's a mordika concept of Zerizus. And he brings down Kedarkai from all different fascinating Gemaras and other Makairos. Fine. Now, so fine, you could go through each one of the chapters in the sefer and see different things. Now, what's interesting is that on one hand he says that it's likar derech Chazal, chizuk and Yerushalayim midas Torah Tefilah Emunah. But you see, in certain chapters, there's an element of a certain type of kanoyis that he wrote with things that were bothering him that he saw that. Based on what he says already in the Hakdama, from the things that from looking at people, as we're going to mention shortly, or hearing what people asked about. Now, he got this Messiah already from the earlier Musar Svarim that I said, L'mashal, his father. So in Chai Olam, the one chapter, which we spoke about back in one of the episodes, is a chapter where the Stipler comes out in the chapter all about Shabbos against the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasa. So there was a kanayis in the sefer Chai Olam of other things, besides of the problems of the generation that the Stipler talks about. But there was like a sort of a kanayistic piece that he left in even Seif Yama. The Chazon Ish also is Emunah B'Tachan Ki Yadua, without getting into Barichos. The Chibur has to do with his take on Musar, what he held about Musar. He was anti-certain Nekudis in Musar. And there's a certain element, some of the chapters has a certain level of Kanayis, connected what he felt is not authentic. Is not authentic enough. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky got this type of Messiah. So some of the chapters you could sense such a type of thing. I'm going to mention just a few of them. So one chapter he has, it's called Tahira. So he says as follows: Das harbe kadmonim shaloi bitlu tfilas Ezra el l'Torah avlo tfila aser achidbo. You have to go to the mikvah, and he brings down different sources. After b'shulchan aruch nifsek Rama mikol makan kasvar achroinim shanoig litvol tavil of a bracha. And then what does he do? He brings you down a Tshuvas Min HaShamayim, a Magam Esharim from the Beis Yosef, an Arizal, a Reishis Chachma, a Chesel Avram. All these people talking about pro Tefilah, the great chashivas of Tefilah. And not only that, he says a fascinating thing. V'harbu G'dolei Yisrael lo bitlu miyameim k'mova b'todoiseyem, that many Gedolim were not mevatel from toiveling. And then he says, I saw in a sefer shekol hachiburim sheniskablu b'kol Yisrael heim elu shemechaber nizer b'tfilas Ezra v'hayoyim shematzi mikvois v'kalut bo bevada mi sheyachol roi Eliezer b'zeh. But then he says, what about Shabbos? And there he talks about halachas of Shabbos, and then you see his Litvak and the Chazon Ish that he brings out about talking about toiveling in the mikvah and what his father's anhaga was, how to do it, if you could do it, that he also talks about. But the point is that here you have a chapter which you see that he's saying fascinating things, and he's using not your typical, he's going with a Kabbalistic Messiah over here, that it is a tremendous Inyan, and the Svarim that were accepted to in Klal Yisrael, you see, it's known that was that these were Yidden that were makbid on Tefilas Ezra. Okay, so if I just saw such a chapter, I'd say, okay, maybe one time. But you see it again and again. I'm just going to mention a few other examples. Tznius. So he talks about, and this chapter is again He quotes at various Makairis about the importance of tznius. He starts from Mishnah Berurah. He has some Chazals, and then again some Zayars he throws in, and then he refers you to women that they have to be makbid on tznius. U'avoni yiseinu harabim hayoyim hador parutz u'miskashtem b'Yosher. The two orangutan in there getting dressed up. Harba yish to dabar al zeh b'avoni yiseinu harabim v'ashrei misha nizeres b'zeh v'loy tistakel al havertzel v'kolshkin al apritzes u'masha tubash Yosher b'ged tznius tiske b'Yosher levonim tzadikim v'talmid chachamim v'vayla zecher l'kol tuv k'moshe kasa b'Zerizus Kadosh, again of Zerizus Kadosh from Mishnah Berurah. So you see again over here an element that he saw. He was aware of. This is what people were not in. We're talking about our generation. Tznius is a problem. Okay. Another chapter is about kinna, jealousy. So again, this is you do the kamida, which already the psukim talk about, and the mishnayos and the chazal. So he brings that down, kedarke b'kodesh, and then all of a sudden he talks about different cases of kinna. When is it mutter? So we know lamashal is a thing kinna seifrim tarba chachma. He talks about that. What's it going on? Fine, but that's a different shmooze. And then he starts talking. The rest of the chapter is very sharp. He says, "V'yesh harbe anoshim b'dayreinu." Many people in our generation, they spend without a cheshbon. They see other people spend it. They feel they have to spend it, and they get into major chayvis b'li cheshbon. Alfei chayvis, and they have to sell their house, so they travel to Chutz La'aretz, and it gets worse and worse. Now he blames it on, in part, women, nashim daitan kalis, and whatever they see by their husband, they lachats by their spouses. Okay, this is this today. When one listens to all different speeches of all different rabbanim, you see that men are definitely nichshel in this plenty also. But he refers you to l'mashal abir halacha. There's a bir halacha in Siman Tav Kuf Chav Tes that talks about, for Yom Tif, you should make sure to spend money. What about the rest of the week? You should make sure not to. This is the Chavetz Chaim talking. And they just spend money like crazy. And that's, we're talking about before World War II. The Chavetz Chaim Grada, he also blames it on the women. And then the Chavetz Chaim refers you to a conscious of his called Sfas Tamim, where he's ma'irich about this. So here, interestingly enough, so after bringing down this Bir Halacha, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky tells you to various letters of the Chazon Ish, Lamashal, not to borrow. The Chazon Ish says not to borrow money from people, because it ends up causing lots of problems. And then he tells to a Chavetz Chaim about these things. Now, obviously, some people, when they hear this, they're going to say there's obviously clashes with other anhagas of our generation. But this is what he says over here, clearly black and white, and probably because of the feedback. This is what he says again back in Agdama from what he was able to see. People complaining to him they don't have money, etc., etc. Now, there's another chapter. This is a known chapter, a known sheet of his. It's called Perik Hey Hadras Panim. So here, this is a very sharp chapter, very, very sharp. He begins with about shaving. So he says as follows, very sharp sentence. Only in recent times, then he brings down a Targum Yonason that is lo yilbash. And then he has other Makairos. And then basically his approach through this parak is through Api, the Psakim of the Chavetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, his father, and including the Rav Shach. He shows that it's Aser Gomer to shave and you must have a beard. So Lamashal, he brings down, and even the shavers, so he quotes you, the Chavetz Chaim, and Lukuti Halachas and Makis is very against it. He has a har over here, and these shavers that they're not good. The Chazon Ish also was very against it. Not only that, he's Matzayin that the Chavetz Chaim wrote a whole chibur called Tiferes Adam, where he says shaving is very problematic, and the Chavetz Chaim is using over there a lot. The Chachmei Kabbalah were very, very anti-shaving. Now, he also brings other quotes of the Chazon Ish, with the claiming it's learned from the Goyim, and he says that he quotes a powerful sentence from his father. Amar Maron, when a person will come into him with a chup or with someone that shaved, he said that he wanted to throw up. Ad kedei kach, this is what the stipler said. He says his father was not pro putting the payas behind the ears, because it sounds like you're embarrassed from the mitzvah. Bekitzer, this is a very, very chamerdika, vicious chapter where he comes out very strongly, and he's gebuing it based on the, as I said, his heroes, the Chazon Ish, the Stipler, and the Mishnah Berurah. And over here he's quoting you the Mishnah Berurah in various places, Ayin L'kutei Halachos and his Kuntris Tiferes Adam. Now it's clear over here, Marshall, even the tzitut, this long tzitut, this beautiful tzitut he brings from Tiferes Adam, it's influence of Kabbalah over here. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, this quote, I said that the Stipler that he was so nauseated when people would not have a beard. So Gedalia Nadal, also from the same base medrash, also it's brought down a similar type of quote. And okay, now the Chafetz Chaim, the Mashal. What's interesting is this was a thing that it seemed to be very bothersome to the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim wrote many chiburim, and not all the chiburim are as popular. So one of his chiburim is Nitchei Yisrael, and in Nitchei Yisrael he also has arichos against shaving and talking about it la halacha. And this was a chibur when Yidden wanted to go back to go live in America. So Kiyadua, he wrote a whole chibur about how to different things that the nisyonis and stuff. And this is one, and he had very machmir. Similarly, he wrote a sefer. It's a known sefer, but not really used. Machne Yisrael for soldiers. Chafetz Chaim. Also over there, he's very machmir about shaving, trying that you should try to avoid it as much as possible. Point is that apid these gedolim, it comes out very strong not to shave, and you have to have a beard. Now, interestingly enough, this is a huge, huge topic, and we're not claiming in this episode to discuss it by Arichos, just to mention one or two marmakaimis about it, and then to move on. It's interesting is that one of the great mukubalim that we had throughout our generations was a Yid, Rabbi Menachem Azaria Pano. He's born in 1548 and dies in 1620. He's the Ramami Pano, one of the great mukubalim. He was influenced from the ksavim of the Arizal that he was successfully able to get also. And besides for the halachic conversation of shaving, there's also Al Pi Kabbalah, which is what Chafetz Chaim is bringing, and this is what Chaim Kanievsky is quoting. So some wanted to bring proof that the Al Pi Kabbalah, there's no problem to shave, and that was based on Haga claiming that the Ramami Pano shaved. There was a Chuvas Bereisik. He claimed he was someone that was a talmid of the son-in-law of the Ramami Pano. He says that he shaved. The Chassam Sofer seemed to have trust this claim. It's Yadua. Others say that there's a picture of the Ramami Pano with a beard. This is an old discussion. A lot has been written about it. Okay. In 1903, a biography on the Ramami Pano came out. Very nice biography. And this biography even has ha'aras from Rameir Dompletsky, the Baal Kli Chemda. And at the end, he has a whole chapter we have to discuss. He says, what's the story about the Ramami Pano? Did he shave or not? So he discusses it. And Bekitzer, a few years earlier, David Kaufman printed in a French journal, I believe it was in 1899, a picture showing that the Ramami Pano had a beard. But what's going on? The basics. Okay. So Lamaisa, it's always a problem when you find a picture from 300 years later. How much could you rely on it? Who said it really is the picture? Or maybe at different times he changed his mind. It's also possible. Not only that, anyone who knows that the Ramami Pano, he revised his whole world of Kabbalah after there's the Ramami Pano before he got the Ksavim of the Arizal and then afterwards. So maybe this affected it. I have no idea. This is way above my pay grade. But anyway, the point is that the Chassam Sofer was willing to accept that he possibly shaved, and so that part of the discussion is if you have an Havana of Gedolim Mekubalim from Italia, Meshach Hadaris, they did shave. Okay, as I said, we're not going into Barichos. Elliot Horowitz has various articles about this where he discusses it in Kia Dua, which we're not going to go into Barichos. The Ramchal, it appears, amongst the many tainas that people had on him, which was also a fascinating topic maybe one day to go into, was that he shaved. And he was a Makubal. Okay, he was also from Italy. Now, just to one last Nakuda, two last Marmakaimis about this is number one. a highly interesting sefer, to put it mildly. It started coming out back in 2013, called Messiah Moshe from Ramart Tendler. So it had various askamas, including from Rav David Cohen, who equates it to the autobiography of Daderes and of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Okay, because he says there's Murdik Chedushim and discussions over here. Kiyadur of Moshe was makel about shaving, and does one have to have a beard? And there's a lot to talk about it. But the point is, in this volume 1 of this sefer, there's a 4-page discussion of Ramosha, the handling, the chiyuv of it. Incredible language where Ramosha says. Grad is also handling this Ramami Pano. He's also handling the Kuda of Kabbalah, what the Messiah was, and he says that people always shaved. He comes out that many people, that it's not just the Ramami Pano that might have shaved, many people shaved, and this is obviously a conversation that needs a lot of arichos, but just as it's Friday, time is short anyway, it's not the main point of the episode, just to show there's a different approach. Now, Lamaisa, already in the Sefer Svarim, my justification of quoting this Rav Moshe is because in the Sefer Svarim, someone asked the Chaim Kanievsky something. He says, I'm not someone to argue, not a bar plukta to argue on Rav Moshe. So it's Yidua that there is at least the Mitzvos for some people today, including myself, I don't have a beard. And that I was told actually some people don't listen to my episode because they don't have a beard. Okay, it happens. But anyway, Lamaisa Rav Moshe is in those pages. It's fascinating to see what he talks about. Okay, now what in a book called Letters from Mir, which was written, a Bacher wrote back letters to his parents in the 1930s in the Mir. It's clear that in Mir many the Bachim shaved, and that what's his name? Ramosha also talks about the minig of the Olam Yeshivas. It was definitely clear that in the Olam Yeshivas before World War II, many of them shaved. Okay. Now, is there any other noisim in this fascinating chibur? So time is short, so we'll just mention a few more briefly. Number 1, Liman HaTorah. So, of course, we're going to find in this sefer material about Liman HaTorah. So so first of all, excellent, again, doesn't need my askama, but an excellent chapter. And he begins the thing, people come. Again, this is clear. This is what people were coming to complain to him. We're asking for brachas, that they're not matzliach, it's not going easy. No. Learning, he says, Tois gadol, at Torah efsher shetelech kal. It doesn't come easy. It's only ba'amul v'yagia. End of discussion. So first, you see, this was a question. Now, you want to be a talmid chacham amiti? Tzarech lishkoid har bala Torah lumay basmada. There's no shortcuts. Then he says a fascinating thing, which many Bali Musar say it, and people testify to be true, and I think there's, in my own experience, there's also truth to this. Hadavar yadua b'yeshivas sheloi habali kishron etzlichu. It wasn't the Iluyim b'derech klal ela masmidim. Achiluk ben bal kishron le'in she'enim bal kishron u'shemi she'enim bal kishron tzarech lilmod ein yinoid chetzi shah isha aval achrach shneim shaven afilu mi shechalash mein b'kishron im yasmin kvar hevtichu chazal she'yatzliach. And then he brings from his father also about this nakuda. So you see some fascinating information. He says, look in the sefer Chais and Yeshua Barichos about this concept of the avodah of shkida. Then he says, which he doesn't say often, Ukidai me'oid lilmoy b'sefer zeh ki kuloi nisyaser al shkidas haTorah. So this sefer, what's his name? This Chais and Yeshua was written by the great Gaon Rabbi Yehoshua Heller, a great Bal Musar, but also a tremendous Litvish Talmid Chacham, brother of the famous Rabbi Chil Heller, the Amudei, and he was a Talmud Muvuk by the Nachlas David, Reb David Tebli. He has askama in the sefer to this incredible sefer Chais and Yeshua, where he says, he talks about his relationship with his Rebbe Asher b'meilu zachiti l'shamshe v'lamdeni darkei ha'iyun u'paiskim v'derech hadrush b'agadas chazal. And he gets this beautiful askama from him about the sefer, and it's I could testify this is a fascinating sefer, well worth to learn. It's not a light read. In general, this farmer Yehoshua Heller, I highly recommend them. And it's interesting, is the Stipler in the Chai Olam, it's Yadua in the back in the beginning of the second volume, he recommends 4 svarim to learn. One of those 4 svarim is a different sefer of Rabbi Yehoshua Heller, which is also I could testify I agree with the stipler over here, not that he needs my haskama, but it's called Me'az Adas, a fascinating sefer. He also recommends the Chaysin Yeshua and the Divrei Yeshua. So also the stipler was into this sefer. Fine. So that this is another practical chapter of, we could see what's going on, things that he was asked. Okay, now then here's a chapter. I would say this is probably a famous chapter of Chaim Kanievsky, very controversial, especially in recent years. This discussion, and we're just going to mention a few brief topics that are found in this chapter. But first, this chapter is called chapter Yud. And so chapter Yud is called Chinuch. Okay, so in this chapter, mamish, I hold it's kedai to learn carefully if you're a parent, and even if you're not a parent, it's kedai to learn before, because as they say, as we're about to say over here, he talks about there's a question out of Yom. A lot of ink has been spilled. Who's responsible for the chinuch of children? Is it the school or the parents? So Chaim Kanievsky already, he's meirich and says that the point is that the house has an unbelievable hashpah on the chinuch of the children. So number one, I like to mention over here on this major maramakim that's kedai to read and learn carefully. Reb Shamshon Fal Hirsch, it was published you could buy it separately, but there's the collected writings of Reb Shamshon Fal Hirsch. Volume, I think it's 7, is about his shitas of Torah and how to educate. In that volume of Torah and education, there's an incredible chapter, a few chapters, where he talks about when does chinuch begin. So he says it's not when he goes to school, it's right when the kid is born, and how he talks about it, and it's so current. Even what he says, it's amazing how he was able to. First, it's the translation into English. I mean, I didn't read the German, but the English is beautifully. I think it's very accurate, but it's written very well, and how he puts it down, and the importance that a parent must understand. The chinuch begins early on, and it's kedai to read Saiwa of Shamshon Fal Hirsch writes Barichos over there, and to keep in mind when you see this Reb Chaim Kanievsky, this is one very big yesod. Another thing is that Chaim Kanievsky talks about is people sometimes have a kid that's very gifted, so they praise him a lot. He says, no, this is not good. Even though you mean good, but it gives the kid gaiva, and later on it could come and backfire. Okay, this is also a very important piece of advice, and he writes it out. He writes it out beautifully about praising a kid too much. Then he says, people ask, this is a question I know many people ask, is when do you start davening for a kid? He says, you have to daven for the kid all the time. They should be ma'irdik matzliach. Another nakuda he talks about is when you should start learning Musar. So he says, already at the age of 7, his father was miyayitz people to learn with their children even 5 minutes a day, easy sefer such as our tzaddikim. So these are pashut, so to speak, things, kedai to read, to see how he puts it down. But then, earlier on in this chapter, I would say this is probably one of the most quoted chapters of his, he talks about a question which is, may one or should one hit a child? So here Chaim Kanievsky begins the chapter. You can't touch your child. They should figure it out themselves, and certainly not to smack them. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, "Ein zeh derech hanachoyin al pi haTorah." After nochen shein laharbos lakos, he doesn't say to beat them. Rak liitim rechaykas shim loikim avu b'zeh kol hashpa shal makas avu loy shelo liyasrum klal. Not that you shouldn't punish them at all. And then he brings down obviously the famous Mikvah already from Yerushalmi, Psukim and Mishlei, etc., etc. So he comes out that you should smack your child when necessary. Not only that, he brings he discusses it by Orchos over here. Mamash, he has 3-4 pages about it. He says, Yesh lizar shalolak is kosher, not to beat him mamish, and not to do it b'tayus kas, how to do it. But the point is that you see, and even a teacher, it sounds like he holds, yes, there is such a thing of punishing the student. But again, he's not encouraging mamish beating the living daylights out of the children, and he shows it in even the Chazon Shemunah B'Tachon, which again goes back to our theme of the Chazon Shemunah B'Tachon also playing a hashpah on him. So now the point is that this chapter, some people disagree with it and say, okay, maybe Chaim Kanievsky held like that. Maybe this was in the 1990s when the sefer came out. Today, Aser Gomer. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm not an educator. I'm not a paisik. I'm not a rabbi. So I'm not taking any opinion. I am off the hook. I'm not taking any. I'm not saying anything. What's a hachra over here? Just interesting. Some very quickly 3-4 marmakaimis on this topic. Number one is, let's say, educating in children. We find igeris hagra. Okay, so this is fascinating. It's even known piece of the Igeris Hagra. The Gra wrote when he went to Eretz Yisrael, which he ended up not going in the end, but he wrote to his wife a whole hadracha, a fascinating letter. Kedai to go through. So then he talks about certain things that you have to b'makos achzarius to hit them mamish if they curse, if they swear. You have to hit the children b'makos achzarius. Okay. So now, what's interesting is like this. Right away, well, can't be that he says such a thing. And not only that, but makis achzarius. So some people say, Avada, you have to take out that girsa in the letters, but Lamaisa research has shown that in the earlier versions of many of the earliest versions, including what was in front of Rav Yosef Salant and others, the nusach was makis achzarius. Now, Lamashal, there's an edition of the Geras Hagra from my friend Rabbi Kalman Radish. So he brings you down various gras in other places where he talks about it, that you do have to hit your child to teach him Yiras Hashem and everything. But obviously there is Hagdaras, not to beat the living daylights out of him, etc. And it's kedai to see all the different pieces inside of how the Gra talks about it and how Chaim Kanievsky talks about it, how he brings it out from the different places to see what it is exactly that he's pro. But Lamaisa, even the Chayyadam, who is also, we've mentioned in the past, from the influence from the Beis Medrash of the Gra. So Lamashal, he also says he has in Siman Samach Vav, Din Chinuch HaKatan, he talks about you have to mechanech them, and he says Chanech Narach B'Darkoi, and he says Ma'id Hizer Shloima B'Sefer Mishlei Al Chinuch Habanim V'Im Lo Yivaser B'Dvarim Yakenu B'Shevet. But he says Lo Yakenu Makos Achzarius K'May Yashaitim. So though Ella, you have to do it moderately B'Shevet or Tzua. Fine. Now, and even though Katan is not par einshim, but so there has to be some moderation in it. But the point is, from the Geras Hagra, it seems to be the consensus of various people is that one is able to hit their child. That's what some Makar say. Ulgros mentioned Revolbi, Lamashal in his letters. He has a whole chapter. He has a whole letter about punishing children, and he says. He seems to not be pro today, and this is this letter was written in 1988, not punishing the child with physical things. Okay, so you have to, obviously, as a parent, you have to ask the people that your Rav, the people that you're miyayitz with, but the point is, Rabbi Kanievsky says, at least on some level, it has to be. What was done throughout the generations? So, okay, besides the Gra, do we have any earlier sources? So we have plenty of sources that they hit. Besides, obviously, Psukim Mishlei, just to throw out one Maramakam about this, is there was a chibur published in Yiddish that was very, very popular called Seder Mitzvos Hanashim. This was written by the great Masas Binyamin, Talmud Muvak of the Ramah and the Marshal. He wrote a sefer in Yiddish for women on Hilchos Nida, Chala, and Halakas Ner. Over there, he talks about that the women have to make sure that they shouldn't have Rachmanis on their children when they see them doing something wrong, and they should make sure at times they need to smack them. And if you don't smack them, this is achzarius, this musar, and he throws out the psukim and shleim amel. So this isn't now. Recently, this was translated into Hebrew. At one point, it was translated into English by Professor Fram. But anyway, the point is, this is a tremendous work early on, and we could bring many marmakaimis about it, but we're not going to. That's not the point of this. Is just to give us a little sampling. Okay, now just to conclude with with a few last very brief points, as time is late over here on my end, and it's like this. The last chapter is a chapter all about Tefilah. I mentioned it was published earlier. This is a friend of mine, Rabbi Benish Ginsburg. He told me that he recommended, he had talmidim, they weren't sure, but they were having difficulties with Tefilah. So he told them, learn carefully the chapter on Tefilah, and they came back reporting that it had an unbelievable effect. You have to learn it very carefully. the first part of the chapter is fascinating material, how he weaves in all different things, Kedarka B'Kodesh, Chazals, and other things, and he takes some strong stance on certain issues, Lamashal, Davening Vasikin, he's very pro it, and other aspects. It's a very, very nice Geshmaka chapter to go through, and then he has Dinei Tefilah Sherab Mezalzlim B'hem, sometimes because they don't know, and whatever, and each one of those 46 sifim that he has are very important to Chazer, to look into. They're based a lot on the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, fine. That's one famous chapter of the thing. I think that, as a matter of fact, I think someone even wrote a chibur just on that chapter, explaining it, handling it. That came out maybe after he was nifter. Okay, he has a chapter called Simcha Shel Mitzvah. They have to do mitzvahs b'simcha. So here he tells too a bunch of Makairis about it. In the Chassidish world, they're very fond of this. They, Litvaks, they don't know anything about Simcha B'chlal, Simcha Shel Mitzvah. They, just do a mitzvah because Hashem Yisbarach told you, but Simcha Shel Mitzvah, okay. He brings you the famous Charedim. It talks about it. He has some other interesting Makairis. And then he says a whole Nakuda, a different Nakuda in the concept of mitzvahs. To be Mazaris, to do mitzvahs, you should be Makayim as many of Taryag mitzvahs that you could do. And he tells you from the Gra, and he says also on his father, that he would try to do as many mitzvahs as he could. Lamashal, he says, he saw his father, Shtadl L'kayim mitzvahs matanos v'reishis agez, opinion petach hamar, that he should be with a sefer Torah. And if you look in the pictures, in the various picture books on Kanievsky, you see they always brought him. He's also tried to do this at the Gra and the Stipler, which goes back to my theme again and again. These were important highlights, these people. But he also talks about more about this, bringing a fascinating, long, arichastic piece from Chaim Vital about behind this Nakuda. Okay. Now, there's one last decide in the sefer that we will conclude with this very briefly, and that is as follows. Throughout the sefer, there are many chapters where the emphasis is talmidei chachamim and all different aspects of a talmid, which play out with a talmid chacham, the greatness of a talmid chacham, the respect one has to give a talmid chacham. L'mashal, he has a chapter called Hafach Ba Hafach Ba. Now, this is actually the Stipler also has in his farm, and the Chazon Ish also has the greatness of Chazal, that everything they were able to see in the Torah, they got it through the Torah. Now, interestingly enough, I'm just going to mention as are right now, he says that the Chachmei Adar, they learned, they knew a lot, and he brings you many different Makairis and Chazal, that all that they knew was through the Torah. Various science and different chachmas they knew through the Torah. So fascinating is, I would think that this chapter, which in many other chapters that he does, Lamashal, he knew chachmas nituach, he says, which the Chazon Ish also, the has a whole chapter. So I would think he would end off the chapter and kachava with the Chazon Ish. He doesn't, which is we'll discuss this more in a different episode with about this. But he has a chapter which is called Kavod Rabbi v'Talmid Chacham. Also, going with this Yesod of where he talks about these type of inyanim, and throughout he has a chapter which is called Hashgacha, seeing the greatness of that you have to listen to Talmid Chacham with some fascinating stories that he from the Chassam Sefer and other Makairis. And throughout the book, you see that in the beginning I mentioned, he quotes Chazal. He read Gedolim books, and that's why Lamashal in the chapter which I already mentioned earlier about Tefilah, he says, means he read these books, and throughout his writings in this Orchos Yosher, he sprinkles it with maisis, not only from that he knew firsthand from his father and the Chazon Ish, from different Makairos like that. Now, so it's basically what I'm trying to get at is it's an important point for him, a theme in various of the chapters, the greatness of Talmid Chacham and Gedolim, etc. So there's a fascinating chapter, and with this I conclude, it's the chapter about Ruach Hakodesh. So in this chapter, he mamish talks about Ruach Hakodesh. Again, I recommend reading it. Again, the sefer is available on Hebrew books, so one could easily go through it. I'm not going to quote all the different things that he says when he talks about Ruach Hakodesh, but here he has a chapter, Ruach Hakodesh, and so he says, Lamashal, in the conclusion of the chapter, so he says, the Davos Arena Kam Palmeitz Gedolei Yisrael, there were Gedolim that also had this different aspects of Ruach Hakodesh. It's a Me'ein Nevuah. He says, Lamashal, Yesh Lefam Shabrachas Va'itzis Meskaimus B'Schus HaShoyel Shemamen B'Mun. Now he's saying a different Nakuda, that when people, the bracha, why is it Mekuyim by the Gedolim? Because the person who asks believes B'Emunah Shlema Shemilas HaChacham Miskayemes U'B'Schus Zeh B'Emes Miskayim. Dem Lo Yimamen Zeh B'Leiv Shalim B'Emes Lo Miskayim V'Zeh V'Davar Zeh Mischalif L'Fi HaShoyel. And he brings a Meshech Chachma that says such a thing. V'Davar Zarina Kam Pametz Gedol Yisrael. So this is a fascinating nakuda in the whole sugya. But he talks about Ruach Hakodesh, starting with he brings down Geshmak Chazon Ish and other aspects of this nakuda. Now, he says you could see that there was a power of Ruach Hakodesh. One quote: "What's going on?" Okay, fine. Anyway, I not going to go into barichos all the different nakudas with Ruach Hakodesh, but the nakuda I would like to be Messiah is like this. It's interesting is that the Chazon Ish talks a little bit about Ruach HaKodesh. The Stipler in Chai Olam has a whole arichos showing how Chazal had Ruach HaKodesh, Gilei Eliyahu, and then he has a few cases of it, and then here he mamish has a whole parak about Ruach HaKodesh. Is it precedent? When is the precedent to talk about Ruach HaKodesh in Litvish circles? So what's interesting is that one of the first works of about a gadol was there's a chibur called Toldos Adam from Rabbi Cheskel Feivel, which is a work on Reb Zalman Volozhin, the younger brother of Chaim Volozhin, Talmud Muvak of the Gra. So in that book already, there's arichos about Ruach HaKodesh, and it's interesting things like this. After that work came out, various Reb Chaim Volozhin wrote a bunch of different introductions about the Gra. And never was the concept of Meifsa mentioned in the earlier introductions until mamish the last one. What changed? And not only that, in the first edition of the Toldos Adam, he also didn't talk about it. He played it down. He doesn't talk about it until later on. And you see they're talking a little bit about Meifsim, and they're very, not like the way you would predict how Litvax, Kalta Litvax don't believe in Meifsim stories or what changed? So it seems, and this is a theory of mine to be Meirich on a different time, but the point is this was the time Hasidim were very into this, discussing it. So eventually, over time, already the Chaim Volozhiner and even the Rizam Volozhin, they started talking about these things that they weren't comfortable talking about. And you say, yeah, on the Arizal they spoke about it, but if you look from after the Arizal, you rarely will ever see such language discussions of this now. But slowly, not only Hasidim, it's like a regular part of it. So even the Chazon Ish has a little bit about it. The Stipler has more, and Rabbi Kanievsky he's madgish a whole parak about Ruach HaKodesh because today it's pashut, it's a given. People talk about it. What does it mean? So he puts down in very nice context some of the nakudis behind what is Ruach HaKodesh. Anyway, the point is these are some of the many different things that one could gain from learning the sefer. This is a beautiful, beautiful sefer, very well written, and one could learn it very easily. To be aimed on all the different nakudis, I'm sure there's a lot going on. Why he picked these gemaras and all these things. This is not this is above my pay grade, but I believe others have attempted to do some about that.
Thank you, Rabbi Brodt. So when are you beginning your shir on Orchos Yosher for the broader community?
That I can't say. I leave it up to others that are much more royal than me about that. I could just say some points about it. That's it.
Okay, and those who you suggested may not listen to your episodes because you don't have a beard, so that's why we have a special audio only track, so they don't even have to look at your face.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
You too. Bye.